Right, Susan, I believe we are most likely live, and if we're not, I'll fix it later. This is another episode of Prairie Views, and today's guest is Susan McCrary, and Susan's one of our engineers, and I'll let her introduce herself and tell you all what she does for Prairie.
All right. Well, glad to be here. I'm a senior water resources engineer for Prairie and have been doing that for, oh gosh, a little over 2 years. And prior to that, way past history, I was a teacher for 5 years. I taught math and art. Went back to school, got my engineering degree, and I started working in water resources right around 2000. So it's been a long haul here. Um,
Hmm. That's awesome. So, where did you go to school to get your
at
degree?
it was University of Missouri Rolla at the time,
Right.
but now it's Missouri S&T.
That reminds me, there's always been a conflict among engineers who had that spillover between when it used to be called Missouri University, University of Missouri Rolla, UMR,
Uh-huh.
and then it became S&T. And yeah, it seems like the folks that graduated from UMR really want to stick with that, on their resumes and everything. So are you one of those?
Oh, I used the correct, you know, name on resumes and official things like that, but I
Yeah,
slipped back into UMR
sure.
during
My dad,
conversation.
my dad actually graduated from UMR, so
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'd be curious to know if you could work on any kind of dream project, being a water resources engineer. Like what's like your ideal project, your dream project?
Well, I'm really passionate about water quality and environmental impacts of stormwater. And so my dream project, and I've had the privilege of working on a project or two like this where you're doing the water resources and the stormwater management, but you're not just doing it for that purpose. You're finding other benefits to it. And a lot of times you can bring that into like a big park project where the stormwater management ends up being a playground for kids, or it's a ball field or something like that. And so really love those kinds of projects where it's not just stormwater management, but it's a beautification project or something recreation that's in addition to it. Those are a lot
Yeah.
of fun.
Well, and like you said at the beginning of your answer, not just managing the stormwater from a flood protection perspective, but also managing
Mm-hmm.
it from a water quality perspective, which
Right.
I think is very interesting. And there's so many innovations out there of how to do that, right? And how to do that in a
Mm-hmm.
way that, again, maybe it beautifies the area or it creates a recreational opportunity, or those are really cool projects. I agree. Um, if you could switch roles with anybody at Prairie, and you didn't do water resources engineering anymore, but you did something else at Prairie, who would you switch roles with for a day and why?
I'd have to say maybe the hydrographic surveyors. Just being outside on the boats. I'm sure they're not always in beautiful settings, but I just think that would be fascinating. Plus, actually seeing what's going on beneath the surface of the water.
Uh, that is an extraordinarily popular answer, by the way. It seems like everybody at Prairie wants to be a hydrographic surveyor.
Yeah.
But I understand it. I get it. It's adventurous, you're always in a new spot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's totally fascinating to see what's under the water surface that you would never know was there. I mean, all those make it pretty interesting, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could go anywhere in the world for an actual engineering project, where would you love to visit and what type of project do you think it might be?
I mean, the world is huge, so it's kind of a tough one to answer. Um, but as I didn't mention this earlier, but my husband and I travel in our RV. And so I've been working fully remote with Prairie and traveling around and love the national parks, currently in Yellowstone, which is amazing. And so I think a project in the national park, um, any of the national parks working on their stormwater issues, I think would be a amazing opportunity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to, for those that are listening, I don't want you to miss what she just said. We are having this conversation and she is currently working from Yellowstone National Park in an RV, which is phenomenal. Like where else can you do that kind of thing? So Prairie is one of those places you can do that. And I think that's pretty awesome. Um, so if you weren't an engineer, if you weren't a professional engineer, what other career do you think you might have chosen and why?
I've actually thought about this because with my background, I've got both sides of my brain going. I've got the analytical side, and then I studied art in with my first degree. And so I've thought about like landscape architecture would be a
Hmm?
really interesting mix of, those two sides.
I actually thought about that when you mentioned your love for water management and water resource management,
Hmm.
stormwater management, and the kinds of things that you like to do with that. I thought the exact same thing. I thought of landscape architects that I know that I haven't done with Prairie yet, but with the former company, we won a really nice project in Joplin after the tornado.
Mm.
They were going to rebuild a new library, a public library. And the
Hmm.
firm that I worked with at the time, we won that project and um, we were teamed with a landscape architect. And I honestly think what won us that job was some of the landscape architect firms' ideas about stormwater management on the site.
Hmm.
They were so clever and so interesting and fascinating with some bioswales and rain gardens and
Right.
natural filtering. And like, I think that's what sold the project. So to your point, I think being a landscape architect would be quite rewarding, no doubt. Um, so if somebody wanted to work for Prairie because they just heard that you're working in Yellowstone and they're like, "Ooh, that sounds awesome." If somebody wanted to join Prairie, like tell what advice would you have for someone interested in working for this company?
Um, well, first of all, I'd say do it because it is a great company. There's not a lot of companies that would hire somebody who is traveling around the country in their RV. I am also working part-time, so that's not something that all companies would would do. So the flexibility um, that Prairie has given me has been amazing. As far as advice, if you're interested in working, um, definitely highlight any, more than just your technical experience. So having your technical abilities is, of course, very important, but what are some things that you've done that are a little bit outside of the norm? Um, what are your communication skills? If you're working remote, you have to have very good communication skills. You need to be able to quickly convey your information, whether you're on a video chat or through emails or other chats and things like that. So I would highlight those aspects in addition to just what your technical background is.
Yeah, that's great, great advice. And it reminded me of another question that I wanted to ask you, which is like, every engineer has projects that go sideways. I mean, if you do do your job long enough, you're going to have a project that surprises you and it doesn't go as planned.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you describe a time when you had a project that did not go as planned, and then what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I don't know that there's been any project that's completely gone as planned. So that happens all the time. Um, Sometimes you think about the things that go wrong during construction. There's a lot of things that can happen there. There's utilities that you didn't know were there, and you have to redesign on the fly. Um, but there's also things that have to happen early on in the project. And there have been a couple times where we've had a project, it's been a great project. Um, you go through, you do your design, you're very excited about it, and then the public support is not there. So maybe it's somebody on the council or it's neighborhood, they don't quite understand what's happening, or they just don't want the construction mess, things like that. So getting that buy-in early in the project, I think is really important.
Yeah, there's always, and I think one of the most disappointing things I remember my dad saying as an engineer is when you'd really put a lot of effort into something that you got pretty excited about,
Mm-hmm.
only for it not to happen,
Right, right.
because of like you said, lack of public interest or lack of funding, or even leadership within the owner can change,
Mm-hmm.
and when you get to through the design phase and they say, well, we just don't want to go that direction anymore. Um,
Yeah,
those can
but
be
just
those can be disappointing.
right, and just not ignoring the people that are going to be impacted by the project that you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So let's go to maybe a more positive side of that. What's a project that you just are really proud of and really happy that you were a part of?
Well, before I was with Prairie, I worked for the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District and was put in charge of putting together their green infrastructure pilot program. And that was the main reason for it was to reduce combined sewer overflows. So huge environmental impact. Um, but in a certain area of the city, we were focusing on green infrastructure. So those stormwater management practices we were kind of talking about earlier, rain gardens, bioswales, pervious pavement, things like that, trying to keep the stormwater out of the combined sewer system as much as possible. So, trying to address the problem before it gets into the system. And with that project, we were able to do a lot of just really interesting projects, working with landscape architects. Um, they ended up being neighborhood beautification kinds of projects, um, just beautiful gardens, on these corner lots that had been abandoned, things like that. So was really, that was probably the highlight, I would
Mm,
say, of my career.
awesome. Yeah. And I bet when you're in St. Louis, sometimes you like to swing by and see some of those
Mm-hmm.
and know that you had a part in that. That's got to be always a lot of fun and rewarding. Um, so obviously working at Prairie, we're multidisciplined. We have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different disciplines and services that we provide. So I'm asking this question based on your internal experience, but then also your external experience of working with other, subconsultants or architects or contractors. But what's something valuable that you've taken away from having to learn to collaborate with other teams and other disciplines, whether they be internal, within Prairie, or they're just the external folks, the stakeholders that you're always having to work with and collaborate with on a
Mm-hmm.
project? Something valuable you've learned from that experience.
I'd say most valuable lesson is I don't know anything. It's like I know this much. And
Yeah.
so many projects have so many other aspects to them. And thinking that I understand all those aspects is, I've realized that I really don't. So if I need to come up with a planting plan to go along with a stream bank stabilization project, I'm not the one to do that. I'm going to rely on our environmental scientists to come up with that plan. So yeah, there's so many different aspects.
No doubt. It's like I think some of the smartest people in the world are actually the people that realize the more they learn, the more they know, the more they realize they don't know. Like there's such a
Mm-hmm.
vast amount of knowledge and vast amount of experience and problem solving that you just don't know.
Right.
And I think that's a good sign of intelligence. Well, Susan, it's been really good to have you on Prairie Views today.
Yeah, it's been a
And
pleasure.
yeah, it's been a really good conversation. I told you the 15 minutes goes by super
It
fast. So
does.
yeah. Well, this is Prairie Views where all the engineers are strong, all the land surveyors are good looking, and all the scientists are above average. And we'll catch you next time.